Section 1. The toll of the bellet was the feast of St. Eustace, and the village of Renfield lay bathed in the soft glow of lanterns and late autumn twilight. Nestled in the heart of Wiltshire, it was the kind of place that time had overlooked. Its thatched roofs, cobbled lanes, and centuries-old oak groves forming a pastoral scene unchanged by the march of progress. Yet Renfield was not forgotten entirely. It was famed, quietly but firmly, for its cathedral, an 11th-century Gothic marvel that loomed above the village like a brooding sentinel. With its fluted spires, flying buttresses, and gnarled gargoyles leering into the mist, it was a place both sacred and severe, beautiful and forbidding. That evening, the last notes of evensong had scarcely faded, one final, trembling chord drifting down from the organ loft, when a scream shattered the stillness. It was not the kind of sound that belonged in a cathedral. It was raw, jagged, and terrifyingly human. The congregation froze, the echo of that scream ricocheting off the high stone arches. A few seconds later, someone, Miss Charity Breville, as it turned out, ran into the nave, her voice hoarse, her hands trembling. "Help! Please, someone help! It's Uncle Alistair!" Canon Alistair Breval, revered elder of the Cathedral chapter, was found lying across the chancel steps. His head was twisted at an unnatural angle, eyes fixed in an expression of mute horror. His crimson vestments, brocade and silk, chosen for the feast day, fanned around him like a gruesome parody of martyrdom. But even more shocking than the corpse was what was missing. The altar had been stripped of its most precious relic, a silver chalice, an heirloom of the Breville family, donated to the church centuries before. It was gone. There had been no thunderclap, no flickering of lights, no thunderous escape. Just a scream, and then silence. The cathedral absorbed the shock, as it had absorbed centuries of whispered sin, solemnly without disturbance. The air itself seemed still, as if reluctant to stir. Reverend Cyril Ambrose, Dean of Renfield Cathedral, was the first to react. Tall, thin, and scholarly, with a look of perpetual contemplation, he moved forward slowly. "Lock the doors," he said, voice low but firm. "No one leaves." The great oaken doors boomed shut with finality. A few moments later, Superintendent Bernard Venn arrived from the local constabulary, a man with a heavy brow, lean frame, and the posture of one who had never expected more than livestock disputes or missing garden gnomes. Venn examined the scene with grim precision. "No forced entry," he muttered. "No one's left the building. That means the killer is still inside." He glanced around at the stunned faces, each now wearing the mask of suspicion. "One of you," the small group that had remained in the cathedral for the full length of the service, either by duty, invitation, or sheer coincidence, was led into the chapter house to await questioning. There were 6 in all, Dean Ambrose himself, whose hand trembled slightly as he removed his spectacles. Mademoiselle Vivienne Durand, a visiting historian from Paris with pale skin and sharp grey eyes that took in everything while revealing nothing. Sir Giles Markham, aristocratic and theatrical, clad in choir robes that fit as though tailored in Savile Row. Miss Charity Breville, the canon's niece, her Italian scarf clutched at her throat, cheeks pale with something more than grief. Felix Rudge, the nervous young organist who claimed he had slipped away near the end of the service to adjust a sticky pedal. And finally, Brother Leonard, a lay brother, soft-eyed and silent, whose daily life revolved around prayer, candlelight, and simplicity. The superintendent took their statements, his gravelly voice cutting through their excuses and condolences. Alike, nothing added up. No one had seen anything. No one had heard footsteps or cries beyond the scream. The chalice, solid silver, engraved, too heavy to pocket, had vanished as completely as if taken by angels. It was Sir Giles who first raised the matter of outside assistance. "Superintendent," he said, his tone stiff with condescension, "this is not the sort of affair one handles with village procedure. A man has been murdered, in a cathedral no less, and a priceless relic has been stolen. We need someone who understands nuance. Dean Ambrose hesitated, then gave a slight nod. There is someone, he said. A man I met some years ago at a diocesan conference in Belgium. If he could be persuaded to come, he might— Let him come, said Sir Giles, before this place becomes a circus. And so, the next morning, as mist curled through the hedgerows and the cathedral bells tolled with hollow solemnity, a man stepped off the 7:12 train from London at Renfield Station. He was of modest height and precise bearing. His overcoat was pristine, his shoes polished to a mirror gleam. A bowler hat rested firmly on his head, and beneath its brim sparkled the most observant eyes in Europe. A constable, clearly flustered, to be involved in something of international importance, held a cardboard placard that read simply, Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Poirot took one look at the damp cobbles, the sky like pewter, and the fog curling through the hedgerows. Mon Dieu, he said softly, brushing an invisible speck from his cuff. Already I sense disorder. But we shall impose symmetry, n'est-ce pas? The constable nodded nervously and led the way down the lane toward the cathedral. As they walked, Poirot tilted his head, sniffing the air of Renfield like a hound catching scent. He spoke mostly to himself. A murder, a chalice, a holy space violated. It is not merely a crime, it is a statement. Sacrilege, yes, but symbolic. 2. Someone here believes themselves above tradition, above reverence, perhaps above consequence. He paused. That will be their undoing. As the mist parted to reveal the cathedral's towering spire, dark against the morning sky, Poirot's lips curled into the faintest smile. This, I think, he said, shall be most interesting.
Section 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The chapter house of Renfield Cathedral, normally a place for quiet ecclesiastical discussion, had been transformed into something far more tense and theatrical. The long oak table, polished by generations
of clerical elbows, now bore cups of untouched tea and a faint scent of candle wax and anxiety. High-arched windows let in grey light that did little to warm the room. The 6 remaining occupants sat arranged not unlike a jury, though none dared claim innocence aloud. When Hercule Poirot entered, every head turned. He did not hurry. He moved with precision and control, as if each step were deliberate, each pause part of a larger composition. Behind him trailed Superintendent Venn, arms folded, gaze wary. Dean Ambrose stood to greet the new arrival. Monsieur Poirot, he said, offering a hand that trembled only slightly. You honor us. I wish your visit were under different circumstances. Poirot bowed politely. The circumstances, they are unfortunate, yes, but where there is disorder, we shall impose order. That is why I am here. He turned to survey the room, gaze drifting briefly over each face before coming to rest on Sir Giles Markham. You were the one who requested outside assistance, oui? Sir Giles rose with the poise of a man who expected his importance to be recognized. Indeed, this is no ordinary crime. We are dealing with a murder and the theft of a centuries-old relic. I believe the situation demanded someone of specialized reputation. A wise decision, Poirot said mildly. Now, if you will permit, I would like to speak with each of you. Not an interrogation. No. Merely conversation. I prefer to listen first, to observe, to see what is out of place. Because in such matters, it is always the little thing, the overlooked detail, that reveals the truth. He placed his gloves neatly beside a modest notebook on the table, then looked toward the dean. Let us begin at the beginning, Monsieur le Doyen. Tell me, what do you know of Canon Breval, and of this chalice that has now vanished? Dean Ambrose sat slowly, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. Canon Breval had been here for nearly 40 years, a man of deep learning, uncompromising in his views. He came from an old clerical family, His ancestors served the church through wars, plagues, reformations. He was traditional. Did he have enemies? The dean hesitated. No one who would say so openly, but he could be difficult, stubborn. He opposed certain changes to the restoration. He viewed the cathedral not as a building to be altered, but as a sacred trust to be preserved unchanged. Poirot nodded. And the chalice? A Breval heirloom, 12th century, silver, inset with a single amethyst. Canon Breval's great-grandfather donated it during the 1890 restoration. It was brought out only for high feast days. It holds no mere monetary value. It is symbolic, sacred. Symbolism, Poirot repeated softly. Yes, that is what I feel most strongly here. He turned slightly in his chair. And you, mademoiselle, he said, directing his gaze to Vivian. Durand. You are here on scholarly business? Mademoiselle Durand met his eyes with calm self-possession. Oui, Monsieur Poirot. I am attached to the Institute for Medieval Ecclesiastical Studies in Paris. I was invited by Dean Ambrose to review the cathedral's inventory of relics. There are several items in the archive that may have connections to forgotten continental orders. You are a historian of relics? More accurately, of the social history behind them. Who owned them, who venerated them, who killed for them. The room went still for a beat too long. Poirot inclined his head. An apt observation, no? Sir Giles let out a brittle laugh. You might say she's obsessed with symbols and saints. She's been buried in the crypt archives all week. Mademoiselle Durand gave him a level look. Unlike some, I find history instructive, not ornamental. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A difference in priorities, perhaps. He glanced toward Miss Charity Breval, who had been silent, her eyes red-rimmed, a silk handkerchief crumpled in her lap. You are the canon's niece, yes? She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Uncle Alistair invited me to stay while I recovered. I'd been ill in Naples earlier this year. He thought the quiet here would do me good. Had you spoken with him much these past days? She hesitated. Not much. He seemed preoccupied, distracted. I asked if something was wrong, but he only said the cathedral had secrets it was not ready to share. Poirot tilted his head. Curious. And you had returned just this week? Yes. I arrived Tuesday. I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years. And before the scream, had... You seen anything unusual? I left my seat for a moment. The incense had become too much. I was just returning to the nave when I heard it. Her hand tightened on the handkerchief. I found him there, alone. Poirot nodded once, then turned his attention to Felix Rudge, who had been fidgeting with a tuning fork since the moment Poirot entered. You left the service early, I am told. Felix blinked. Yes, sir. Only by a minute or two. The B-flat pedal was sticking again. I'd meant to repair it earlier in the day, but I forgot. I thought I'd fix it before the hymn ended. Didn't hear a thing until the scream. And you were alone in the loft? I swear it. There's no other way up or down. And no one could have taken the chalice while you were there? Felix opened his mouth, then faltered. I don't think so. But I wasn't watching. The altar, was I? Poirot gave him a long, unreadable look, then turned at last to the man seated furthest from the group, Brother Leonard. The lay brother sat with hands folded, eyes downcast, a portrait of quiet humility. When addressed, he looked up. You live in the cloisters, yes? Poirot asked. Brother Leonard nodded. I do, monsieur. I tend the candles, the linen. I live to serve the house of God. Did you see anything out of place yesterday? No. Monsieur, I was lighting the votives before the service. I did not leave the nave. Poirot studied him. And did Canon Breval speak to you recently? The brother was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. He warned me. He said something sacred had been disturbed. He told me to watch the walls. Poirot straightened ever so slightly. The walls? He said the cathedral would bleed if no one listened. There was silence again, broken only by the wind pressing faintly at the leaded windows. Poirot reached slowly for his notebook. "I thank you," he said. "Each of you. The facts, they will come. But already I begin to see a man of tradition, a sacred object, and symbols layered like dust in an old book. The truth hides, but it leaves shadows." He looked to Superintendent Venn. "We shall speak again, but now I must see the scene itself, the chancel, the altar, and, most importantly, the walls." The Dean rose. "You'll want the full layout of the cathedral?" "Not only that," Poirot replied. "I shall want silence, time, and light, for a building, like a man, reveals itself slowly. If this cathedral has secrets, I intend to hear them whisper." As Poirot stepped toward the door, the great bells of Renfield Cathedral tolled once more. Not for celebration, not for service, but to mark a death. Section 3. Footsteps in the stone. The cathedral had emptied by the time Poirot crossed its threshold alone, save for Superintendent Venn, who followed with the reluctance of a man both respectful of the space and impatient. With its silence, outside the mist clung to the buttresses like a second skin. Inside, the cold air remained heavy, as though the stones still remembered the scream. Poirot paused in the central aisle, tipping his hat back slightly. His eyes moved slowly, tracing the vaulted ceiling, the shadows that gathered in the triforium, the way light fell across the worn flags of the nave. To most, the cathedral was merely architecture, a relic of faith and history. But to Poirot, it was a mind waiting to speak. Its symmetry, its design, its arrangement of light and shadow, it all told a story. And somewhere within it, someone had rewritten the ending. "The chancel is ahead," murmured Venn, gesturing toward the sanctuary where Canon Bravell had died. "Bodies been removed?" "Of course, and forensics already swept the area. Well, as much as our budget allows." Poirot said nothing. He stepped forward, his polished shoes soundless on the flagstones. When he reached the chancel steps, he stopped. The space was austere, elegant in its solemnity. The high altar, carved from dark stone and draped in white linen, stood beneath a triptych of saints whose painted eyes seemed to follow the living. But it was not the altar that Poirot studied. It was the floor. He knelt, touching the edge of the flagstone where Canon Bravell's head had lain. The stone was subtly darker, cleaned perhaps, but not entirely free of the tragedy it had witnessed. A faint crack ran through its center, an old fissure perhaps, or something newer. He fell backward, Venn said quietly, as though the cathedral itself required decorum. Neck broken instantly, according to Dr. Witham, likely struck the stone as he fell. Poirot straightened, dusting off his gloves. And the chalice, it was here. Venn gestured to the altar. On the central cloth, directly behind the missal stand, it would have been visible to everyone in the front pews, but after the scream, it was gone. Poirot moved toward the altar and examined the cloth, meticulously ironed but subtly askew, at one corner. He smoothed it, revealing a faint indentation where the chalice had stood. Then he stepped around the altar, placing himself behind it. "From here," he murmured, "a person could reach the chalice unseen if the congregation was distracted." But the service had not ended. The choir was still singing, Venn nodded. "Last hymn of evensong." Poirot looked up toward the choir loft. "The organist claims he left to attend to a mechanical issue?" "That's what he says. Rudge. Nervous little fellow, but he doesn't strike me as capable of murder." "No, perhaps not. But murder is often committed by those who surprise even themselves." Poirot returned his gaze to the steps. "And where was the canon standing?" Midway down the steps, likely turning back from the altar when it happened, Poirot tilted his head. So the blow came from above or behind? No signs of struggle. It might have been a sudden push, or he tripped, or he saw someone he trusted. Poirot walked slowly up the steps and stood where the canon had stood. He turned in a slow half-circle, looking down upon the nave from the cleric's vantage point. The view is theatrical, he said softly. A man giving a final blessing, a congregation watching. Yet, somehow, someone moved unseen. He descended again, crouching to examine the base of the altar. His hand brushed against something small, a sliver of wax, pressed into the crevice between two stones. Poirot murmured. A candle, perhaps. But why here? Venn leaned over his shoulder. Could have dropped during preparation. Poirot pocketed the wax. Perhaps, or perhaps someone moved in this space during the service. Someone who should not have. He stepped back, then turned toward the side aisles. I wish to see the vestry, the choir loft, and the crypt. All in time. But first, I would like to speak with the verger. Venn looked surprised. Henry Styles. He wasn't in the cathedral during the service, homesick with bronchitis. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Even the sick leave fingerprints on routine. Who performed his duties in his absence? The dean distributed the incense. Brother Leonard lit the candles. Felix Rudge set the hymn books. The rest was left undone. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. No one replaced the verger. Curious. A structure such as this requires precision. No. If one cog in the mechanism is removed, the rhythm falters. There was no time, Venn replied. Canon Breval was insistent the service proceed uninterrupted. Insistent, Poirot repeated. He knew something then, or feared it. He turned again, gaze drawn toward the ancient walls. They are thick, he said. And yet, someone heard a scream. Not a struggle, not a cry for help. A scream, high, sudden, not the voice of a man prepared. He began walking the perimeter, fingers brushing the stone. The cathedral spoke in subtle language, gaps between bricks, uneven mortar. Air drafts that shifted ever so slightly. Near the northern transept he paused. A narrow section of the wall showed signs of restoration. Newer stone, less weathered, a seam too straight. He tapped it gently. Hollow. Venn raised an eyebrow. A passage? Or a concealment? Tell me, has the cathedral had recent renovations? Some. Work on the lower arches and crypt access, funded by Sir Giles Markham. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. He is invested, financially and personally. But whether that grants him insight or opportunity, that remains to be seen. Poirot stepped away from the wall and made for the southern aisle. Superintendent, he said, voice calm. Please gather the 6 individuals once more. I would like to speak with them, one by one, but not here, in the cloisters. A sacred space may unsettle the untruthful. You think one of them took the chalice? Poirot smiled faintly. I think the chalice was not the only thing taken. Something else is missing. Something intangible. A silence that does not belong. An absence that has shape. And the killer? Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. The killer believes they have buried the truth within these stones. But I, Hercule Poirot, know how to listen when old walls speak. Outside, the bells tolled again, not for morning this time, but for the midday hour. Light filtered through stained glass, dappling the floor in ruby and sapphire. The cathedral, for all its grandeur, had begun to reveal its fractures. Section 4 Secrets Beneath the Stained Glass. The cloisters of Renfield Cathedral, ancient and ivy-laced, formed a quiet quadrangle where time itself seemed to pause. Stone arches cast long shadows across the flagstones, and the air carried a stillness more sacred than silence. It was here, amidst the low murmur of distant doves and the rustle of dry leaves, that Hercule Poirot chose to conduct his next inquiries. He had arranged a chair at one end of the cloister walk, its back to the light so the interviewee sat fully in shadow. It was not a trick, at least, not entirely. It allowed Poirot to watch faces, the flickers of emotion, the reflexive betrayals of thought, and for those unused to scrutiny, silence could be louder than questions. The first to arrive was Sir Giles Markham. He strode across the cloister like a man used to stepping onto stages. Velvet choir robe discarded in favor of a navy blazer, gold cufflinks gleaming at his wrists. He sat with a practiced sigh, crossing one leg over the other. "You've something to ask, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot folded his hands on his knee. "Just a conversation, monsieur. You were close to Cannon." "Breval." Sir Giles gave a non-committal shrug. "Close enough. He sang bass beside me in the choir. We dined, now and then. He could be a bore, always lecturing on liturgy and lineage, but I admired his devotion and his voice. A rare instrument, even." "In old age. You fund the restoration, yes? That is a considerable investment." "Hardly a gamble," Sir Giles replied. "The cathedral is the soul of Renfield." "And I rather like beautiful things. Stone, glass, harmony." "And yet," Poirot said mildly, "you argued with the canon recently." Sir Giles's smile thinned. "I wouldn't call it an argument, a difference of taste. I wanted the Western. Window replaced with a more modern design. He wanted a full restoration of the medieval figures. He considered my proposal heresy." "And the chalice? What did you think of it?" Sir Giles leaned back. "Gaudy, sentimental. But the old man was attached to it." Poirot let the silence stretch. "And where were you precisely during the final hymn?" "In the front pew," Sir Giles replied. "Singing, as usual. The congregation could hear me. I rarely go unnoticed." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Yes, Monsieur Markham. That is precisely what I think." Sir Giles rose with an arched brow and a self-satisfied smile, and Poirot made a subtle note in his book as he departed. The next to arrive was Miss Charity Breval. She moved more slowly, her dark green coat buttoned tight despite the relative warmth. Her eyes were tired, ringed with sleeplessness. When she sat, she did not look at Poirot, but at the stones beneath her feet. "You are not well, mademoiselle," Poirot observed gently. "I'm fine," she said softly. "Just tired. I've had little rest." "You have suffered a loss." "Yes, but perhaps also a confusion. Your uncle, he was not merely a man of cloth, but of complexity," she nodded slowly. "He was strict, but kind. He believed in rules, ritual. He didn't say much about his past, but I always felt he was carrying something." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Something recent?" "No," she said. "Older. Sometimes I'd find him in the archive room, just staring at old documents, parish records, letters. One evening he asked me if I believed the church could be haunted, not by ghosts, but by memory." "And what did you say?" "I said yes." Poirot's brow lifted. "And you, mademoiselle, where were you during the service?" "In the side aisle, 2 rows from the back. I slipped out to get air just before the final verse of the hymn. I didn't feel well. I returned when I heard the scream." Poirot studied her. Convenient, perhaps, for a thief. She looked up at last. "Do you think I killed my uncle, Monsieur Poirot?" "I think," he said calmly, "that grief and guilt can sometimes wear the same expression." She lowered her gaze again. "You'll find nothing in me but sorrow." She left with the faintest tremor in her step, and Poirot sat in silence for a moment before summoning the next name. Felix Rudge arrived with a shuffle and a twitch. He was clutching a notepad stained with musical notations and what appeared to be biscuit crumbs. He sat as though he expected the chair to accuse him. I'm not very good with interviews, he said immediately. Poirot smiled reassuringly. There is no examination here, only understanding. You left the organ loft early? Felix nodded, tapping his notepad. The B-flat pedal was sticking again. I needed to fix it before the final hymn ended. You did not alert anyone? It happens often. Canon Breval always said I worried too much. But I didn't want to risk a wrong note during the recessional. Poirot folded his arms. Did you see anyone on the stairs? Hear footsteps? Felix frowned. No, just the choir, and the usual echo, though. Yes? He blinked. There. Was a draught, a cold breeze. Strange, really. There's no open window in the loft. Poirot made a note. That is helpful, monsieur. And the chalice. Did you ever handle it? Me? No. I don't go near the altar. Too nervous. I'd knock it over. Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, perhaps. Felix left, still muttering. To himself, and Poirot signaled for the next. Vivienne Durand entered as if gliding. Her coat was dove-gray wool, her boots spotless. She sat without hesitation and looked at Poirot without blinking. I am told you study relics, he began. I study patterns of faith, she corrected. Relics are merely the fossils it leaves behind. And Canon Breval, did he share such academic interest? To a point. But he was cautious, protective. He didn't like questions about the chalice, as if history had no right to touch it. You were in the nave during the hymn. She nodded. Left transept, near the statue of St. Eustace. I always sit there. It affords a view of the whole chancel. Did you see anything? No one near the altar. But I did see Miss Breval walking back from the aisle. Her expression, it was startled, as if she had just seen something unexpected. Poirot raised an eyebrow. And you? I heard the scream. I saw no movement, but I felt a disturbance, like something ancient exhaled. Poirot gave a small nod. Merci, mademoiselle. She stood without being dismissed, and left with the same quiet grace. Last came Brother Leonard. He walked slowly, his habit brushing the stones, his sandals near soundless. He bowed before sitting. You were lighting the votives before the service? Poirot asked. Yes, monsieur, as I do each night. Did Canon Breval speak to you that evening? He said only this. Be watchful, brother. There are things buried that should not wake. Poirot leaned forward. Do you know what he meant? Brother Leonard hesitated. No, but he was afraid. And during the hymn, did you see anything? I saw shadows in the gallery. But the light plays tricks. Poirot studied him carefully. Do you believe the cathedral hides a secret? Brother Leonard looked up at last, eyes calm and solemn. I believe all churches hide secrets. That is why we kneel in them, Poirot gave a small bow of his head. Thank you, brother. When he was alone once more, Poirot closed his notebook and rested his hand upon it. 5 voices, 5 masks. But somewhere among them, truth had whispered. Not shouted, whispered. A draft in the organ loft, a startled face, a missing presence, and a crack in the stone. The walls had begun to speak. Section 5. A whisper from the crypt later that afternoon. The sun made a half-hearted effort to pierce the veil of gray cloud hanging over Renfield. But the light that managed to filter through, the stained glass windows of the cathedral, was pale and cold. Poirot stood in the nave once again, his hands behind his back, as he surveyed the chancel from a distance, as if the structure might divulge some unspoken confession if viewed from the correct angle. He had seen what others had not. A loosened thread here, a false note there. A tremble in a niece's voice, a stray glance from a historian too calm, a nervous tick repeated one time too many. Yet none of it was enough. He needed the cathedral itself to speak. Superintendent Venn emerged from the side door that led to the vestry, carrying a roll of architectural drawings in a cardboard tube. He looked windblown and faintly annoyed. "Dean Ambrose gave me access to the old restoration files," he said, unrolling the plans and laying them across one of the rear pews. "Original blueprints and a few modifications from the early 1900s. Most of the major work was done between 1898 and 1905. Poirot adjusted his spectacles and leaned over the drawings. He tapped the crypt entrance with one precise finger. "This passage," he said. "It continues beneath the chancel." Venn nodded. "Yes, that portion of the crypt is sealed. At least, in theory. It was cordoned off decades ago due to structural instability. Only the front section is used now. Tombs of early bishops, some family vaults, nothing unusual." Yet Canon Breval, a man obsessed with tradition, spent time in the archives and crypts, did he not? Venn looked grim. "According to Brother Leonard, yes. But I've asked around. None of the staff remember any formal request to enter the sealed section." "If he went alone." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "He would not have been the first priest to pursue secrets better left buried." He straightened. "Take me there, Superintendent. I must see the crypt for myself." They descended through the sacristy, then into a narrow passage lit by flickering electric sconces that cast long shadows upon the damp stone. The air grew heavier with each step, filled with a faint scent of cold earth and candle wax. As they passed beneath the massive ribs of the foundation arches, the cathedral above seemed to fall away, its grandeur replaced by claustrophobic reverence. The crypt yawned before them, a vaulted chamber lined with sarcophagi and iron-bound coffers. Here, saints and sinners rested in equal silence. Poirot moved slowly, brushing his fingers along the ancient walls as if hoping to draw thought from stone. "Canon Breval came here often?" he asked. Venn nodded. "According to Brother Leonard, at least twice a week. Said he brought journals, old books. Spent hours." Poirot crouched beside a modest tomb marked with a worn brass plaque. He touched the seam where the lid met the stone. "This has been disturbed recently." Venn raised an eyebrow. "You can tell?" Poirot pointed. "Dust, brushed away by a gloved hand. Finger marks at the edge, faint but present. Not vandalism. Someone searching, carefully." He rose, turning toward the sealed corridor beyond the roped barrier. An iron gate, chained and rusted shut, marked the limit of the accessible crypt. A small sign read, "No entry. Unsafe structure beyond this." Poirot stepped closer. "Who has the key?" "The dean. Possibly also the verger, though he's on medical leave." Poirot peered through the bars. Beyond them, the passage descended further into darkness. The air there seemed colder, more ancient. "This door," he murmured, "has not been opened in some time, but something calls from the other side." Venn looked skeptical. "There's nothing back there but unstable flooring and a few sealed tombs. Breval wouldn't have gone in. Too dangerous." Poirot said nothing. Instead, he stepped back and turned toward the visible section of the crypt. He paced along the eastern wall, where a row of worn effigies knelt in frozen prayer. One of them had a small stone ledge protruding beneath its feet, unlike the others. He crouched and studied it. "Superintendent," he said, "help me." Together they pushed. With effort, the ledge gave way, grinding back on hidden rollers with a sound like stone weeping. Behind it was a narrow recess, and within, a bundle of fabric. Venn pulled it free. The cloth unfolded to reveal a crimson altar sash, richly embroidered and stained with something darker than wax. Dried blood. Poirot touched the fabric gently. "Breval's," Venn said grimly. "Possibly. Or his killers." The timing, the concealment. It was hidden hastily, but reverently, as if the cloth were still holy. He rose, his expression unreadable. "Someone came here after the murder, perhaps to hide the evidence, Or perhaps to atone. Ven's voice dropped. You think they returned to the scene of the crime? No, Superintendent, Poirot said. I think this was the scene of the crime? Ven stared at him. You're saying Breville wasn't killed at the chancel? Poirot's eyes glinted. I am saying that it is possible he died elsewhere and was placed there afterward. The chancel may have been a stage. The true act of violence may have taken place in shadow. Ven looked stunned. But why? Poirot tapped a finger against his temple. Ah, that is the question, n'est-ce pas? Why move a body unless the place of death reveals something far more dangerous than the act itself? He turned, already ascending the steps. We must return to the cathedral floor. There is something, an alignment I must confirm, and then I must speak with Miss Durand once more. Why her? Ven asked. Poirot did not answer directly. His voice was distant, contemplative. She spoke of relics, of faith fossilized. But I wonder, does she know the difference between reverence and obsession? They emerged once more into the nave. The light had shifted. The reds of St. George's window now fell across the stone in long crimson lines, lines that touched the chancel where the cannon had fallen. Poirot stood, watching. Blood, he said softly, or something meant to look like it. He looked up at the choir loft. And that draft, that unexpected breeze Rudge described, it came from above, did it not? Ven looked up as well. There's a ventilation, duct behind the loft, connects to the old archive passageway, part of the original monastery design. It's supposed to be sealed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. I think, Superintendent, that very little in this cathedral is as sealed as it appears. Section 6 echoes through the gallery. The choir loft was not grand. Unlike the cathedral's nave and chancel with their sweeping arches and proud ornamentation, the loft was a cramped, elevated perch reached by a narrow spiral staircase tucked behind the north transept. From below, it gave the illusion of elevation and power. From within, it was all dark wood and dust, its organ pipes looming like the ribs of some dormant beast. Poirot climbed slowly, his polished shoes echoing softly on the stone. Superintendent Ven followed, though less gracefully, ducking beneath a low arch that bore centuries of soot. At the top, they emerged into a space that smelled faintly of wax and oil. The organ stood like a solemn sentinel, its keys covered, its pipes rising in careful formation. Poirot moved to the edge of the loft and looked down into the nave below. The view was commanding, every pew visible, the altar clearly in sight. But there was something else he sought. Not what was visible, but what had been felt. He turned toward the eastern wall, where the vents lay. A lattice of carved wood concealed. A centuries-old duct once used to funnel warm air from hidden fireplaces into the upper galleries during harsh winters. The system had long been disused, at least officially. This, Poirot murmured, is where Monsieur Rudge felt the breeze, yes? Ven nodded. We sealed most of the vents during the last renovation. Some had shifted or opened again. The duct here leads to the archival passage beyond the chapter house. Runs behind the nave wall and down toward the old archive room beneath the cloister library. Poirot knelt, examining the vent's edges. His gloved fingers traced the iron mesh, which bore faint scratches along the lower portion. The wood around it had a worn spot, as though a knee or boot had pressed against it, repeatedly. This vent has been disturbed, he said, recently, and someone small or agile, has used it. He rose and faced Ven. We must examine where it leads. Ven exhaled, already dreading the crawl-space exploration. I'll fetch the cathedral keys. The archive hall's usually locked. No need, Poirot said calmly. I shall go with the dean. The historian, Mademoiselle Durand, has likely mapped every passage. She may offer insight, if she chooses to share it. You suspect her? Venn asked. Poirot's brow lifted. I suspect many things, mon ami, but Mademoiselle Durand is a woman who catalogues history to understand what we forget. And sometimes, people forget what they are trying to forget. That is the most dangerous kind. Of memory. He descended the stairs swiftly, already composing his questions in his head. When they reached the nave once more, the bells were tolling the quarter hour, 3 tones that struck the air like knocks upon a hidden door. Mademoiselle Durand was found seated in the cloister garden, a sketchbook resting across her knees. She was drawing, not the cathedral itself, but a detail. One of the grotesques above the eastern apse, its face twisted into an expression of surprise or agony. Poirot approached with deliberate calm. Mademoiselle, he said, your hand is steady. She glanced up, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. I find calm in detail, Monsieur Poirot. In stone, nothing is ever truly lost. It simply shifts. Poirot sat beside her. And yet this cathedral, your subject, has shifted more than most. Vents reopened, doors relocked, passages remembered only by those who search. She closed her sketchbook slowly. You've found the archive tunnel. Poirot allowed a small smile. Ah, so it is no surprise to you. I saw it in the floor plans. It connects to the old crypt entrance beneath the cloister, originally used for smuggling books during the Reformation. Some believe it's how forbidden relics were saved from destruction. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And now? Now it's forgotten, she said. Or, it was. He studied her. Canon Breval knew of it? She hesitated. He asked, About it once, last week. Wanted to know if it had ever been mapped in modern times. I said no. He seemed disturbed, like he had remembered something best left buried. Did he tell you why? No. Only that symbols were returning, that the past was waking. Poirot leaned closer. And you, mademoiselle, did you wake it? Her expression changed subtly, not guilt but a kind of sorrow. No, she said, but I think I knew what he feared. Poirot waited, silent. She spoke again, softer this time. There's a symbol etched in the crypt wall, behind one of the vaults. I saw it when I was helping inventory relics, an arc over a cross encircled by vines. I've seen it in only one other place, in a French monastery archive destroyed during the Revolution. It's not part of any known ecclesiastical order. It was secret, suppressed. Poirot's eyes glinted. And you told Canon Breval? Yes. He went pale. He asked me never to mention it again. Said it had no place here. Poirot stood. Show. Me this passage. Now. Together they entered through the chapter house. Mademoiselle Durand produced a slim iron key, one she claimed the dean had lent her for scholarly access, and opened a door concealed behind a hanging tapestry. Beyond it lay a passage, narrow, winding, and utterly dark. Poirot lit a hand lamp from the wall bracket and proceeded in silence, Mademoiselle Durand just behind. The walls here were of a different character, older, more haphazard, with exposed brick and crumbling mortar. The scent of mildew was heavy, but there was something else beneath it. Something colder. The passage turned sharply, then opened into a low chamber with a collapsed ceiling on one side. Here, buried among stone fragments and dust, was what remained of the archive annex. And on the far wall, just above an old ash-stained lectern, was the symbol, etched faintly. A curved arc above a cross. Vines wrapped around both. Poirot stared at it, unmoving. Mademoiselle Durand spoke softly. It's a monastic cipher. I've only seen fragments in forgotten orders. It speaks of protection, but also of betrayal, of truth buried for the good of the church. Poirot touched the carving. Breval found something here, he murmured. Something he believed sacred or dangerous. Something connected to the chalice. He turned to her. Did you tell anyone else about this? She shook her head. No. Only the canon. And now you. Poirot straightened. Then we must consider what the canon feared, and why someone might kill to keep it hidden. He extinguished the lamp. There is a truth buried in this place, he said. And it did. Not die with Canon Breval. Section 7. The shifting of the stones. A steady drizzle had begun to fall by late afternoon, muting the colors of the cathedral and turning the cloister stones slick and reflective. Poirot, ever careful, adjusted his step to avoid the puddles, as he made his way toward the vestry once more. He had requested access to the cathedral alone, no interruptions, no echoing footsteps behind him. Superintendent Venn had grumbled, but complied. There were moments, Poirot knew, when the mind required silence to do its finest work. Inside the cathedral, the scent of cold incense clung to the air. Candles had been extinguished following the hour. Morning prayers, and the building seemed to hold its breath. Poirot crossed to the south transept and stood still, letting his eyes roam. Not just what is present, he reminded himself. What is missing? He walked slowly past the choir stalls, pausing. At each pew, inspecting the floor, the woodwork, the kneelers. He paused beside the pulpit and ran a gloved hand over its surface. And then, his gaze turned upward. Above the north aisle, opposite the choir loft, a carved balcony protruded from the stone, an architectural remnant from an earlier design, now unused. It had no direct access from the main cathedral floor, only a hidden spiral stair behind the altar wall, long closed off during past renovations. But Poirot saw something most would not. A thread. Not literal, no fabric or string. A pattern. A line of dust disturbed upon the upper balustrade. A trail, as if someone had reached out or leaned forward. He made his way back toward the sacristy and found the narrow panel that led to the sealed stairwell. It opened with a long groan, revealing stone steps winding upward into gloom. He climbed, slowly, the air tightening around him, and emerged into the forgotten gallery. The view was commanding, but odd. It did not face the congregation, as the choir loft did. Instead, it offered a diagonal perspective of the altar and the chancel steps. A precise view. A calculated one. Poirot stepped forward and knelt at the edge. The stone beneath his hand was cold, but not undisturbed. The dust here had been brushed aside recently, no more than a few days. A boot print, partial but distinct, lingered in the corner. The tread was sharp, modern. Someone had stood here, watched, waited. The choir's final hymn would have echoed through the space, masking any quiet movement. The organ's bass pedals would have rattled the floors, and in that symphony of sacred sound the canon had been struck or guided toward his end. Poirot stood. No one, he said aloud to the empty chamber, enters such a space without a reason. He descended again, slower now, the wheels in his mind aligning. The loft, the passage, the crypt, and now this hidden perch. Not chaos, not even hatred. A ritual. Later that evening, Poirot requested another audience with Dean Ambrose. They sat. In the vestry, the light low, the windows fogged with rain. I must ask again, Poirot said. Who, aside from yourself, had access to all levels of the cathedral? The crypt, the loft, the archive stair, the sacristy stairwell? The dean steepled his fingers. In theory, only myself, Canon Breval, and the verger. But the verger's been ill, and the canon, of course. Miss Durand has a key, Poirot said quietly. She claimed it was lent to her. The dean nodded slowly. I did grant her limited access for her research, but only to the archives. Poirot tapped his chin. And Miss Charity Breval? Did she ask for any permissions? No. The dean hesitated. But she knew the cathedral well from childhood. She played here often, explored, Alistair sometimes left doors open for her. Even now, perhaps she remembered paths long sealed. Poirot nodded, lost in thought. "And the canon?" he asked. "Did he say anything, in those final days, the sigh?" Dean frowned. "He said the cathedral was breathing again, that it had begun speaking. I thought he was being poetic." Poirot shook his head. "Not poetic. Terrified." He stood, adjusting his cuffs. "Thank you, Dean. One last question. Has the cathedral's foundation ever shifted? Any concerns about the flooring?" "Only in the south aisle," the dean said. "A minor sinkage a few years ago. Nothing structural." Poirot paused. "Then I must walk it. Now." Alone once more, Poirot made his way to the south aisle, his footsteps echoing softly. He walked slowly, counting his steps from the font to the transept. 17. He walked it again. 16 and a half. He frowned. He tapped his cane against the flagstones, hollow, then solid, then hollow again. And there, a loose tile, smaller than the rest, mismatched in tone. He knelt, fingertips brushing the edges, and gently the tile gave. Beneath it, dust. A shallow recess, and something within. It. A folded scrap of parchment, its edges curled, a faint red wax seal cracked in half. Faded writing. Latin, custodiamus, quod non debet revelari. Let us guard that which must not be revealed. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The parchment bore a second mark, a smudge of dark ink, fresh, not years old, days. He rose, slipping the parchment, into his coat. The cathedral had tried to hide it, but someone else had already found it, and handled it. He turned, slowly, surveying the chapel once more. A plan, a ritual, a sacrifice. And at its center, a truth too old to be forgotten. He stepped through the west door as the final light of day pierced the stained glass. You moved in silence. You planned with care, Poirot murmured, voice low and calm. But still, you left echoes. And I, Hercule Poirot, I hear them. Section 8, The Night of the Vanishing Light. The following morning, the mist had lifted from Renfield, but a tension hung in the village like humidity before a storm. Word of Poirot's investigation had spread, though the cathedral leadership remained careful to manage appearances. Services continued, albeit quieter and with fewer candles. The usual bustling footfall around the cloisters had slowed to a hush. Poirot returned to the cathedral with Superintendent Venn and Dean Ambrose. They were in the dean's study now, a warm but slightly claustrophobic room above the vestry, its walls lined with theological texts and stacked folders from 2 decades of parish management. An untouched teapot sat between them. "Tell me again," Poirot said gently, "about the days before the canon's death. Was there anything at all, that seemed unusual in his behavior?" The dean frowned. He had become withdrawn. He was never the most convivial man, but he was changed. He asked for old documents from the cathedral's founding era, things untouched for years. I thought it was nostalgia, or perhaps fear of irrelevance. Poirot tilted his head. Fear of something, certainly. Ambrose hesitated. 2. Nights before his death, I saw a light in the cloister garden, late, past midnight. I assumed it was a votive left burning by accident, but when I looked from the sacristy window, it moved, slowly, as if someone carried it. You did not investigate? No. I was reading in bed. I presumed it was Brother Leonard making a vigile. Poirot's brow furrowed. Did you ask him? I did not. Poirot rose, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. Then we must. Brother Leonard stood in the cloister walk, trimming ivy with a pair of shears so old they looked like relics themselves. He did not flinch when Poirot approached, nor when the question was asked. "Did you walk the cloister garden 2 nights?" "Before Canon Breval's death." Brother Leonard lowered the shears. "I did not," he said simply. "Are you certain?" "I do not leave my quarters after Compline. The night belongs to silence." Poirot considered him a moment longer. Then who did? Brother Leonard looked past him, toward the cathedral tower. Sometimes the walls remember things before people do. Poirot turned from the cryptic remark, but the chill of it lingered. He returned to the nave where Superintendent Venn waited, brow furrowed in his usual squint. "You think someone was here, late at night?" Venn asked. "I do. Carrying a light. Moving through the cloister, likely toward the crypt, or the archive. To find something? To place something, perhaps, or to test what could be moved." Poirot moved toward the transept where a wrought iron gate led to a narrow spiral staircase. "We shall speak again with Felix Rudge, the organist. There is something in his story that no longer fits quite so neatly." Felix Rudge was in the chapter house when they found him, nervously sorting through sheet music. He leapt to his feet when he saw Poirot. "Have I done something wrong?" he asked. "I told you everything I know." Poirot smiled politely. "Then tell it to me once more." I left the loft to fix the B-flat pedal during the final hymn." "How long?" "Were you gone?" "I returned before the hymn finished. 30 seconds, maybe a minute." "And during that time, did you see anyone enter the chancel?" "No." Poirot tilted his head. "You did not see anyone, but did you hear?" Felix looked confused. "Just the music, and a faint wind." Poirot glanced at Venn. "I have walked the ventilation passage. It would not produce such a breeze unless the outer duct was disturbed." Felix blinked. "I didn't open anything." Poirot stepped closer. "Did you see any light in the cathedral during rehearsal the night before the service? A stray candle? A lamp where it did not belong?" The young man hesitated. I might have seen something. From the loft. I stayed late to rehearse. There was a flicker near the crypt stairs. I thought it was my imagination. The wind plays tricks through the organ pipes. Yet you told no one." Felix flushed. "I didn't want to seem paranoid. I'm already not taken seriously." Poirot nodded. "No, monsieur, it is not paranoia. It is instinct. Do not ignore it again." That evening, as dusk draped its veil once more over Renfield, Poirot walked alone through the cathedral. He moved slowly, stopping occasionally to peer into corners, behind tapestries, along seams in the stone. The building breathed differently. Now, its solemnity no longer peace, but pressure. There was something buried here, yes, but not in the tombs. At last, he paused before the altar. His eyes followed the stained glass above, St. Michael with his sword raised high, and down again to the flagstones at his feet. He knelt. He touched the edge of one tile, then another. One was loose. Delicately, Poirot pressed at its corner. It shifted. Beneath it, there was only dust. And something else. He withdrew a narrow, folded scrap of parchment. Faded ink. A red wax seal, broken. A single phrase in Latin. Custodiamus quod non debet revelari. Let us guard that which must not be revealed. Poirot turned it over. A smudge of recent ink lay faint upon its edge. Someone had handled this. Recently, he stood slowly, placing the parchment into his coat pocket. The pressure within him coiled, tighter. The killer had not acted in impulse. This was not rage. It was a plan, precise and ritualistic. And the clue he had just found was not merely a relic. It was a warning. As he walked toward the west door, the final light of day cast a strange shimmer through the nave. Poirot paused at the threshold and spoke softly into the shadows. You moved in silence. You planned with care, but still you left echoes, and I, Hercule Poirot, I hear them. Section 9. A Choir of Shadows. The next morning was brisk and brittle, the kind of late autumn day when the air smelled faintly of coal smoke and the old stones of Renfield Cathedral seemed to contract from the cold. A hush still blanketed the grounds, though the villagers had begun to drift back to routine. Candles flickered in the chapel of St. Veronica. Prayers were murmured beneath breath, and the choir rehearsed in low, careful tones. Poirot entered the cathedral just after 9, accompanied by Superintendent Venn and the verger, Henry Styles, who had returned that morning from a brief illness, still pale but insistent on resuming his duties. "I do not like loose ends, monsieur," Poirot said, as they crossed toward the choir stalls. "And you, while unwell, may possess knowledge that has slipped from view." Styles coughed into a handkerchief. "I've not been much use of late. Canon Breval said I needed rest. Truth be told, he didn't want me about. He said things needed quiet." "What things?" Styles hesitated. "Odd requests. He asked me to retrieve choir books we haven't used in decades. Medieval settings, Latin, some written by obscure composers whose names I had to look up." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "He did not explain?" "No, sir. Just that he needed them for spiritual study. Though I found it strange. He asked for them 3 days before he died, after hours. Insisted he would collect them himself." "Did he?" "I left them in the vestry. When I came back the next morning, they were gone." Poirot turned. "And where were they stored?" "Up there," Styles said, gesturing toward a set of high drawers behind the choir stalls. "Top row. Nobody uses those books." Poirot ascended the small side stair and approached the cabinet. The drawers were large and shallow, designed to hold vellum manuscripts without creasing. He slid one open gently. Stacks of leather-bound choir books lay within, fragile, weathered, and marked with notes in the canon's own hand. Poirot examined several before pausing at one near the bottom of the stack. Its spine had split. Within, pressed between the pages, was a folded sheet of modern paper, plain, except for one phrase handwritten in careful, slanted script. "Ne timeas lucem falacem dat, fear." Not the deceptive light, Poirot frowned. The ink was fresh, not Breval's hand. "Superintendent," he called softly, "look at this." Venn stepped up and read the note. "Code?" "Or a warning," Poirot said. "Placed after the murder. Meant to be found or overlooked." He turned the page. Inside the choir book was an anthem, obscure, written in the 16th century by one Johannes Duretus. Its final stanza had been marked in red ink, "E lumen illucit in tenebris, sed tenebrae noluerant illum," and the light shone in the darkness. But the darkness knew it not. Poirot closed the book and stood silently. This choir book was left as a message. To whom? That is what I must determine. Later that day, Poirot requested a private moment with Miss Charity Breval. They met again in the cloister walk, where the late sun cast striped shadows across the paving stones. She was wrapped in a grey shawl, her hair pinned with less care than before. "Have you ever seen this before?" Poirot asked, holding up the folded phrase. "Fear not the deceptive light." Her face twitched, but only slightly. "No. You are." "Certain?" She looked away. "Should I have?" Poirot stepped closer. "Your uncle was frightened, not of death, but of revelation. He feared not being believed. But someone was listening to him. Someone who left this for me to find. Someone who knew he would not live to say the words aloud." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them clear. "He told me once when I was a child that the light in the cathedral is different from the sun, that it doesn't just reveal, it transforms, that when it falls through glass, it turns ordinary stone into something transcendent." Poirot nodded. "Yes, mademoiselle, and yet it can also deceive. Stained light can conceal as much as it reveals." She turned to him fully. "Do you believe the chalice matters? That someone would kill for it?" "I believe," he said quietly, "that the chalice was not the only thing hidden, and that its theft was not merely a crime, but a signal." "To what?" Poirot did not answer. He simply looked toward the cathedral spire, which now glowed gold in the dying light. That evening, Poirot returned to the choir loft alone. Below, the candles for vespers had been extinguished. Only a faint gleam from the rose window lit the boy. Chancel Poirot knelt at the organ bench. He pressed one key. A single, pure note echoed through the vaults. Then silence. He reached into his coat and withdrew the note, the Latin phrase, and read it again. Fear not the deceptive light. He stood and walked to the back of the loft where the wind had once come through the ventilation shaft. There he examined the grill. Carefully he placed his fingers along the edges and pushed. It shifted. Behind the mesh the stone had been carved away, just slightly, enough to allow a hand to reach through, enough for a view directly down onto the altar. The view was narrow, precise. Someone had watched from here. Someone had timed the choir's final notes. Someone had known when the cannon would turn, and when the chalice would be unguarded. Poirot stared down through the sliver of vision, his eyes narrowing. The chancel had not been chosen for reverence. It had been chosen for symmetry, for spectacle. Perfect stage. He stepped back, brow furrowing. Whoever had stood here had not acted in rage or panic. They had planned it like a liturgy, a service, a ritual. And that thought, more than any evidence, troubled him. Later that night, the cathedral was locked, its great doors sealed until morning. But Poirot did not sleep. Instead, he sat by the fire in the guest house Dean Ambrose had arranged for him, the note still between his fingers. A deception, a false light, a movement before the scream, a cloth hidden in the crypt, and now someone among the suspects had begun to crack. He had seen it in the eyes of one earlier that day, a tremor too carefully masked, a memory breaking loose. The pattern had begun to form. The question now was, would the killer speak before the cathedral itself gave up its truth? Final section. The light that cannot lie. The chapter house had been cleared for one final gathering. The sun had just broken the horizon, sending long slats of gold through the leaded windows, falling in parallel lines across the tiled floor. 6 chairs had been arranged in a half-circle before the great oak table. 5 were occupied. Poirot stood. He did not speak at once. Instead, he surveyed them with that quiet intensity that had unsettled each of them at different points in the investigation. Today, however, his manner was almost gentle. "You will forgive me," he said at last, "for this small drama. But I have always believed that the resolution of a mystery, like the performance of a liturgy, deserves solemnity." He folded his hands behind his back and began to pace slowly. "When I arrived, Canon Breval lay dead upon the chancel steps, and a sacred chalice had vanished. A murder and a theft, yes, but in truth, we were dealing with something far more profound, a design." He turned toward Dean Ambrose. The canon, a man of ritual and tradition, had uncovered something buried within the very walls of this cathedral. A symbol, part of an obscure monastic cipher hidden for centuries. It was not merely academic. It threatened to disrupt a carefully constructed legacy. Poirot turned now to Mademoiselle Vivienne Durand. "You, mademoiselle, knew of the symbol's existence. You even recognized it. You shared your findings with the canon." He was terrified, not by the knowledge itself, but by what it pointed to. Something buried in the cathedral archives, something his ancestors may have hidden or sworn to protect. Mademoiselle Durand did not flinch. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Poirot continued. The chalice was not merely sacred. It was a vessel in more ways than one. Inside its base, hidden behind a false panel, was a scroll sealed in wax, a document we now have in our possession, a genealogy of certain ecclesiastical transactions, names, sums, dates, records of church relics sold under duress during the Napoleonic Wars. Among them, the Breval name. Gasps rippled quietly around the room. The canon learned that his family's legacy, the chalice, had been acquired through deception. He meant to expose this, to atone. But someone did not wish that truth revealed. Poirot turned now slowly. To the final figure in the row, Felix Rudge sat rigid, eyes darting between the others. "It was not you who killed him," Poirot said softly. "Not by intention, but you played your part. You saw the canon enter the loft 2 nights before the service. You heard his muttering, his distress, and you knew he had hidden something important. You told someone." Rudge swallowed hard. I didn't mean... I only said he'd been acting strange, that he kept asking about the ventilation passages. I didn't think... You told Miss Charity Braval." The room turned toward her. She looked pale. Still. Her fingers trembled faintly. In her lap, Poirot stepped closer. "You returned from Italy not just to rest, mademoiselle. You returned because your uncle summoned you. Because he wished to pass something on. Perhaps his regrets. Perhaps a truth too heavy to carry. You listened. But it frightened you. You did not want the Breville name ruined. You wanted to protect." She said nothing. Poirot's voice lowered. "The canon left a message for you in that choir book. Fear not the deceptive light. But you mistook his meaning. You thought he had gone mad. That he meant to destroy his own legacy. And so, in a moment you believed was mercy, you stopped him." She spoke at last. "He knelt at the crypt," she said. Her voice was clear, hollow. "He held the chalice like it would burn him. He said it was all a lie. I didn't mean to hurt him. I tried to take it away. He slipped, fell." Poirot nodded slowly. "And when he died, you moved the body. You placed it in the chancel, staged it as a theft. You hoped it would appear as an outside crime. You hid the cloth in the crypt wall, the chalice you meant to return later. But when I arrived, it was too late." Superintendent Venn stepped forward. "And where is the chalice now?" Charity reached into the satchel by her feet and, with trembling hands, unwrapped a cloth bundle. The silver gleamed. "I couldn't destroy it," she whispered. "It was still sacred." Poirot stepped forward, took the chalice gently, and rewrapped it. "Sometimes," he said, "we preserve what is broken, not because it is perfect, but because it reminds us that truth, once buried, must be brought into the light." Hours later, after statements had been taken and the constabulary had departed, Poirot remained in the cathedral. He sat alone in the cloister garden, the leaves dancing gently at his feet. Dean Ambrose approached, his face drawn but composed. "I never knew," he said quietly, "what that chalice truly meant." Poirot nodded. Perhaps even Canon Braval only suspected. But it was not the object itself that was dangerous. It was the silence around it. The dean looked toward the cathedral walls. "Will you stay for evensong?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No. I have trains to catch, but I will remember this place. Its light, its shadows." He rose, placed on his hat, and gave a small bow. "The dead, Monsieur le Doyen, may lie quietly, but the truth, she speaks, even through stone." And with that, Hercule Poirot walked beneath the arches of Renfield. Cathedral one last time, his silhouette framed by stained glass, leaving behind a mystery solved, and a church forever changed.